Hello! It's the Great Canadian Bagel here, and today we have another Canada federal update, the first one since Carney has taken over. And, well, the people have been asking for this for a while, but I've held off for very good reasons, which I'll touch on through this video. But, with no further ado, I'd like to just call out and tell everyone that as the same time this video is going live, I am going to be running yet another poll. This is going to be Canada National Poll. I'm running it in conjunction with a few people, such as Brian Burgett. And we will be... I don't know how long I'm going to be running this one. Unlike the other ones where I said like a very particular time period to run this, I'm less certain. I'm aiming more for target sample size than number of days. Usually I've run 3 weeks because that's what I need to get the sample, but I'm hoping, because of the collaboration and such, I'll be able to get the sample faster, so we'll see. But, yeah, for the meantime, until I'm done that poll, I'll be shouting it out when my videos come out, and it will be in the pinned comment on my videos. And I'll also be shouting it out in, like, Twitter and on, what's it called, YouTube comments, not comments, whatever, the posts that you can make on YouTube, whatever that's called, I'm blanking on the term. Well, that, let us begin. So, a lot has happened in the last month, in the month and a half since my last Canada National video. And I just want to start here with one thing. I've gotten a lot of comments on this, and I really want to contest this. There has been a lot of people suggesting, erroneously, that my January 6th video was wrong. So just to clear the air on this, this is the video in question. I'm going to play the audio for it. And I'll discuss on it before I continue with the rest of this. Bring in some new blood. However, Trudeau leaving always had to be with a non-cabinet replacement. As soon as you try to replace him with a cabinet minister, it's going to fail. That's what happened with the Ontario Liberal Party in 2022. They tried to replace Wynne with a cabinet minister of Wynne, and they got basically the same result, plus or minus some seats. They might do something vaguely interesting now, because they brought in Crombie, who's slightly different. She's slightly fresher blood. Will she succeed? Probably not. But she'll probably do better than Del Duca. Maybe. Maybe. But make no mistake. If Trudeau does resign, and he is replaced, if he's replaced by someone else in the Liberal cabinet, the odds that they will do any different are astronomically small. The best case for, say, Freeland is she becomes the new leader, calls an immediate snap election, and tries to ride the temporary new leader bump to a better position. But let's say we get a Freeland in April or May, and she rides it out to October. She's not doing better than Trudeau would have if he rided it out to October. Just remember, when Del Duca got the leadership of the Ontario Liberals, he skyrocketed. He was beating Ford. And then he ultimately finished a distant third in seats. Sorry about that. Yeah, so that's kind of the gist here. If you keep playing on that video, I don't want to keep belaboring an old video that I already made and like recycling content in that weird backwards way. I do say Carney is the best choice they have. And lo and behold, he is the best choice they have. So the people commenting that take aged like milk, no, that take aged like wine went exactly how I said it was going to go. The Liberals appear to be going for a rapid snap election, and they did not replace themselves with a cabinet minister. In fact, the previous cabinet ministers did terrible in the leadership race because obviously they're going to do terrible because obviously Freeland, Gold... I mean, Bayless wasn't a cabinet minister, but Freeland and Gold were tied to Trudeau. They're obviously not different than him. It would not be credible. Carney is a different person, and he is coming in, and he is going to get a different result. It's not the same case. Now, will he do this good? That's the interesting question. And that's why I'm going to touch on in this video here. So I know a lot of people have been looking at this in several ways. I know why Claypool himself is a person I have on correspondence all the time. He's himself much more apprehensive about the current polling, and I know some people are trusting it more thoroughly. I'm kind of in like the intermediate position. So let's be very, very clear here. Polling, when it's done by a good pollster, not Ecos, a good pollster, is a accurate reflection of the snap of the population, assuming it is weighted correctly, and it is a representative sample. Now, that doesn't mean every single poll that, say, Leger publishes is going to be good. And that's not because Leger is a bad company. That's not because Leger is going to be trying to screw with people. But if the people responding to Leger's poll are not representative, there's nothing they can do to weight it properly. We saw this really very clearly in the last U.S. federal election for the president. A lot of the polls were saying the liberal or the Democrats are going to do really, really, really good with old voters, and they just did about the same they normally do with old voters. Once you look at exit polling and stuff, but that's the case. Like, the reason why that showed up in those polls is, at the end of the day, the people responding to them were not actually representative of old people in the U.S. Now, if you do enough weighting and you use enough things, you can make that, you can fix that. That's the point of weighting. If I were to sample 1,000 people and I don't weight it, it's obviously not going to be representative. But there's only so much you can do in weighting. Like, just speaking from my own experience as my own polling, the more things I try to control when weighting, the larger the sample I need with how my methodology works. Not everyone's going to do the same methodology, so it's not true for every pollster. But for myself, the more things I weight, the larger the sample I need for the data to be good, for it to work. So I want to control education, income, age, sex at a very, very high level. I need a much larger sample than if I don't do that. If I were to drop education, I can have 150 less people for like an Ontario poll. But if I want all three of them, if I do all four of them in Ontario, I need like 300-ish people from Ontario responding to the poll. Now, we're not talking about a very, very large number, but it does require a larger sample for the data to be good. I could throw weights like weight by religion, weight by ethnicity, weight by all these other things, language spoken at home. These are things that we know from the census. These are things that we have access to for what the proportion in the population looks like, so it's very easy to weight them. But you try to add them, and it's not going to work. But you get the flip problem in a lot of these situations, I think, because a lot of the polls right now, I think, are getting hit by a response bias. And the response bias is driven because Carney's new. So because he's new, he is going to poll better. People don't really know who he is in a grand sense. His name recognition is not too bad, but name recognition is only half the battle in these kind of things, because everyone might know who Mark Carney is now at this stage, but they don't really know what he's like what does he believe, what he's going to do. And that's going to come out over the next month or two. And in that time, that will change things. And that will be the big test of Carney as the leader of the Liberals. Right now, if I do my normal methodology, I get this. Now, I want to be clear. I usually use a low recency bias because we're not in a writ. I don't think public opinion changes as fast as polls reflect because of the problem of response bias. Now, Of course, if the polls keep saying something, like if every single poll release is Liberal +4, my model will converge to Liberal +4 even still relatively rapidly. It'll take 2, 3, 4 weeks of like consistent polling. Or if it's only like one poll a month, it might 2, 3, 4 months. But it will converge to that point, given enough polling data showing that that is a consistent trend. But the way mine works, it smooths things out. So we get this. But an important distinction here, I'll bring up the raw data, and I'll just ignore that for a second. So here, this is what we get if I really cranked the recency bias up. Now, there is some things to note here with caution. Like, I don't think others going to get this many voters in a lot of these provinces. But what you end up seeing is the Liberals take a lead if you put a really high recency bias. And I'm getting them somewhere around the low 40s. And the Conservatives in the mid to high 30, or like 38 range. And I think we're going to be... And that is if I use a high recency bias. This would assume here that the polling right now is correct and that in a few months, nothing changes. I don't normally do this because outside of a writ, inside a writ period, you don't actually have that much time. So people's opinions expressed in a poll are more likely to actually be reflective of voting on election day. But outside of a writ, we could be 6 months from an election. So what is showing right now might just be a blip because of something that's happening in March, but then by October, there's one temporary blip, which is very probably could very well be real, but if it's a blip in March and we're voting in October, that's not going to be real anymore. That's why I don't really use a high recency bias. But the reason I'm publishing this one for now, I don't have a map for it, but I guess you can get the picture. It's 178 seats. It's a Liberal majority. The reason I'm mentioning this now is to point out that this is where it's trending to. And this is an important distinction I like to make here because this is where the data's going, if nothing else changes. Now, and it's also a shot of the bow for certain people who might be watching this video. Now, notably, this is what I feel more comfortable with. This stuff is how I normally do things. So let's just discuss what has occurred over the last month. So we saw here, this is February 3rd. This is my last video. It was about an 18-point lead for the Conservatives. By mid-February, and you'll note in this video, I said it was probably going to be, paraphrasing, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe I said it was a 2-point advantage for tariffs for the Liberals. And the Liberals gained about 4 points. So I will admit on this one, I was wrong there. I think the Trump bump was significantly, Trump trade war, invasion threat kind of bump, was a much, much stronger bump than I previously anticipated. So from this February 3rd to February 17th, that appears to be about 4 points in my modeling aggregate. And the Conservatives lost about a point there. Notably, though, the biggest one here who's losing at this stage is the NDP. The NDP lose nearly 3 whole points. And then by February 17th to March 3rd, this is basically the last week before Mark Carney is the leader of the Liberals and Prime Minister designate. He's not Prime Minister officially. And I think at this point, going from February 17th to March 3rd, especially after the debates, it's pretty clear Carney's going to win. And the polling and stuff like that, and the donations coming out, it's very, very clear he's coming in. He's going to win. So I think at this stage, voters are starting to price in Carney as the leader of the Liberals. So some of the bump that I would expect from Carney as leader is bleeding into this early. And some of the debuff for like the Conservatives is starting to bleed into this a little early. And particularly the Bloc is suffering this. And then by the time we get to the March 17th one, which is as the release of this video, we're starting to see the Carney honeymoon bump come through. Now, the minimum case for a honeymoon bump to me, based on historical data, is it would roughly be the Conservatives gain 2 points, or sorry, the Liberals gain 2 points, and the Conservatives lose a point. That would be the minimum case. If that is true, if I were to publish a video in mid-April, it should be 29 something to 42 something. If I published a video in mid-April. That is the base case. So the next time I do a video, we'll come back to this. We'll circle back to this. And we'll examine, did Carney have a larger than normal honeymoon? Did he actually improve on the Liberals' positions in his first month of leadership? Or did Poilievre not meet the occasion and it has hurt the Conservatives? So there's 3 examples here, and this is how we're going to examine these. So the first one, is the honeymoon bump larger or not? Normally I only do one of these per video. So historically I do the February 3rd one and then a March 17th. But I'm going to keep doing these breakdowns. Honestly, until my next video, I'll do it week by week. And then we can really track to see, like, when does Carney's honeymoon peak? My gut feeling at the time of recording is he's not at his honeymoon peak yet, because a lot of these polls were conducted right at the Liberal leadership race. I suspect his peak will be 24th or the 31st of March, depending. One of those 2 days will be his peak, I think. And we'll see that when I do the tracking. So that's the first question. The second question that I'm going to be tracking here is, does Carney improve or not? Now, my hypothesis being, if Carney does improve on this position, then the NDP Greens bloc will decrease, more so than the Conservatives. If Carney is a better leader than Trudeau was, I expect that to be the case. Because I don't expect Carney to erode too much more from the Conservatives. At this stage, the about 2 points the Conservatives have lost, I expect to largely be the 2021 Liberals who defected Conservative defecting backwards. I don't think Carney is going to win many 2021 Conservatives. It's not impossible. Like, he will win some, to be clear. I don't think he's going to win dramatically more than Trudeau was going to win. He might win like 5% range kind of thing. And I think a very large percentage of the Conservative voter base right now is new voters as well, to be clear. So that test is, do the NDP, Greens, and Bloc as a unit, as a collective, does that 24% keep falling into April? And then the final test is, does Poilievre not meet the occasion? Not meeting the occasion means that this Conservative number will fall. And how you will see what this would imply, this is my expectation, is this: if this Conservative number keeps falling, the NDP, Greens, and Bloc won't decline very much. But the Conservatives will decline. The Liberals might gain from it, but I think it's more so that Carney is probably going to still draw from these guys, but Conservatives will leave the electorate. Conservatives overwhelmingly in Canada, there's lots of polling to confirm this, don't have a second choice. So if they feel like Poilievre's doing a bad job, or the Conservative campaign is doing a bad job, they'll just not vote more often than anything else. Which is, again, why in all of my polling consistently to this date, the vast majority of new voters are voting Conservative, because they're people who did not like O'Toole, they did not like Scheer. They maybe got disappointed with Harper in 2015, or they just could start voting now, and they're voting Conservative and they didn't vote previously, kind of thing. That's who I'm expecting most of these new voters are, especially given my demographics of my audience. So that's the expectation here. So the question here being, where does things go? And that's the big question, really. Now, there's another thing I want to touch on here, and it's related to the general gist of the polls. Now, again, I'm not going to sit here, and I'm not going to say the polls are wrong. I'm not going to say don't believe polls, unless it's Ecos. Don't believe Ecos. Ecos sucks. But what I am going to say is you have to be very, very careful when looking at polls. Sometimes headlines can be very misleading, and this is not entirely the fault of the pollster. Because again, there's a lot of things outside their control. But you will see a lot of polls right now saying that Atlantic Canada is something like 58 Liberal, something like 25 Conservative. That's not happening. Those are not numbers that will occur. For example, specifically, there was a recent Liaison poll. And when you look at the cross tables on this, again, this is not a slight against Liaison. I'm not saying you should not trust Liaison, but there is things in this cross tables that make me a little apprehensive. Now, again, I'm not saying don't believe in polls. Otherwise, just stop watching my YouTube channel. I'm not saying Liaison in particular is bad, but you have factors in here that would surprise me. So first off, this is a very common one in a lot of Canadian polling. You'll have very bad sample, very pessimistic samples in Alberta for the Conservatives. So context here. The Conservatives got 55% in Alberta in 2021. And the PPC and other small splinter right-wing parties got 7% together. So this poll is suggesting that the right in Alberta lost 12 percentage points. Now, Poilievre is from Alberta. He lives in Ontario now, but he's from Alberta. He's very well liked there. The Liberals and NDP, if anything, have gone more anti-oil and gas, the biggest industry in Alberta. The trade war is actually, Alberta's on the wrong side of the trade war for the Liberals. So that I would expect that to be pushing the Conservatives even higher in Alberta. So, numbers like this seem weird to me. Now, this all said, if you were to put the Conservatives at 67% in Alberta and then, the Liberals at, 10 and the NDP at 12, let's say, that's not going to really change the winner very much. That might flip, 5 seats, maybe 10, for really aggressive, but it's probably, 5 or 6. That's not going to change the result very much. But you get things like this, and you get Atlantic samples like this, and it's that's pretty much would be the best showing in Atlantic Canada that the Liberals have ever had. Better than 2015. And I'm just looking at stuff like that, and I'm that seems weird. And then you look at this, and the Conservatives are doing really good in Quebec. They're up 8 points in Quebec. They're up 5 points in BC, but they're down 2 points in Ontario. Things like this. I'm not saying Liaison is wrong. This could be a thing that could happen, but I'm a little skeptical about this. I would want to wait till more pollsters are showing numbers like this. And I will note, there is a very big split between IVR pollsters like Liaison or Main Street and online pollsters on this. The IVR pollsters, for example, all agree, roughly speaking, on what Ontario looks like. But the online pollsters don't. They say it's tied. Or the Conservatives have a slight lead in Ontario. So, there's a lot of speculation on what's actually going on here. And I will note, too, that even with the IVR, Main Street has the Conservatives doing a lot better in Saskatchewan, Alberta. And worse, I believe, in Quebec than Liaison. So there is some distinguishing between different methodologies too. But I don't say this to cast doubt on polls. What I'm saying this is, in a moment like this, and there's a reason why I haven't been doing these videos for a while, where there's a lot of chaos. You have a large, big external threat pushing Canada. You have a new leader coming in. You have a major policy reversal with the consumer carbon tax being replaced, though the industrial carbon tax is obviously still in place. You have a whole lot going on. And you're not going to get a very good picture. I can model it. Other people can model things. And those models and those polls are probably accurate insofar as that they are an honest, best attempt to get an answer based on the people who responded to the poll. But that doesn't mean they're predictive of what's going on. So you really want to be careful in situations like this. Like, this could happen. The Conservatives could be in a minority position, or they could be rapidly approaching a Liberal majority. That could be happening. But you really need to be careful with how you view these things. And the one thing I will always say to anyone watching this, Liberal, NDP, Conservative, polls are illustrative. Polls are instructive. They tell you what the landscape might look like. But they're not prophetic. If a poll is saying that Carney is going to lose, and Poilievre will get a silly minority of 172 seats, 1 seat shy of majority, if he gets a really silly number like that, that could happen. But campaigns matter, people matter, local efforts on the ground matter. So things can change. Maybe in a month, Carney will be sailing to a majority. Maybe in a month, somehow, Jagmeet Singh has come from irrelevance and is going to lead the NDP to the first majority. Like, I know, like, it's probably more likely that Trump will, like, give Canada Maine, but it could happen. I do not have a very high opinion of Jagmeet Singh as a political leader. But now I want to touch on something slightly different here. And this is... So I made a big change in my model. Now, this is a 1.0 version of the change. I'm still tinkering with it. And that is based off of my experience in Ontario, the Ontario provincial election. My biggest error in that election is the degree and intensity of strategic voting. The Ontario NDP pretty much gained votes in all the seats they won, and they lost votes in pretty much every other seat. That's a pretty hardcore amount of strategic voting that occurred, to a degree that's almost remarkable. So I'm expecting something similar to happen federally here. So I have done a change. It's a 1.0 version of the change. I'm going to tweak it a little bit still. And I'll let you know every time I tweak it, just so... Because whenever I tweak something like this, it's obviously changing one of the core things of the model. So it's not, strictly speaking, you can't compare this update to the last one, like one for one, because I've changed a really core thing here. But I am assuming now, in all the seats that the Liberals were clearly leading in, and all the seats the NDP are clearly leading in from like 2021, the NDP will do better in the seats that they were winning in 2021, and they'll do worse in the ones they were losing, and vice versa for the Liberals. In any seat where the NDP and the Liberals got roughly the same number of votes in 2021, they're going to have no change. They'll be about equal. And the reason for that is, again, this Ontario provincial election saw a lot more strategic voting than I've ever expected before. And that leads into an interesting point here. I am forecasting a tremendous amount of strategic voting now for the NDP, because my model kind of baked in some of this stuff, but now it's like really hardcore. Like, I've really overhauled it. And the NDP's lethargic. They're at 13.9%. They're trending downwards. Again, if we go back here, we scroll over, they're trending to a little more than 8% nationally. They are literally trending to have 0 seats. Genuinely 0 seats. That is an honest-to-goodness projection here. The NDP are trending to have no seats. None. The Liberals or Conservatives will win every single seat the NDP currently hold if trends continue. They won't continue, but if they did continue, that would happen. And that's including really hard biases to strategic voting. Really hard biases to incumbents in my model. Both of those being tested in elections. And so, like, they're not just me spitballing numbers. Like, these are things I've done that would make performances in past elections better. Like the Ontario provincial, for example. So, the NDP is just an abysmal position. And it's actually hilariously remarkable to me because, like, you wouldn't expect the progressive, the socialist light NDP under Jagmeet Singh, to lose their existence or be threatened out of their existence because of a central banker in the Liberal Party. Someone you would traditionally expect would just capture like the blue Liberal vote, but no. No. Carney's also winning the Progressives, which is crazy to me, but it is. That appears to be what's happening. Will that stay that way is another big question here. And that could be a situation where they might only be voting Liberal because of the trade war. And as soon as somehow that gets resolved, it probably won't. But if it did get resolved, they might go back. Maybe in 2029, the NDP will be suddenly revived because all these progressive voters who are voting Liberal for the trade war vote NDP again. Who knows? But this is quite an interesting position. And if you're the NDP, this is a very dangerous position. Because there's three things a political party really, really needs to do. So first off, they need to win seats. If they don't win seats after enough elections occur, they'll just disintegrate. There's a reason why the Christian Heritage Party doesn't really do anything. Because they don't win seats. They don't really get close to winning seats. And that makes it very difficult for them to get donors. It makes them very difficult to get volunteers. It makes it very difficult for them to get people to want to run for them. So that's the big one. If you're not able to win seats or consistently win seats, your quality of candidates declines and people don't spend their time helping you. You don't have the money. And this is a big issue that People's Party has under Bernier. It was a colossal screw up that they didn't spend the first two elections really focusing on winning Bernier a seat, and they didn't. They wasted tons of money on a national campaign when they're not. They should have copied the Green strategy. They didn't. The second thing the political party needs to do is it needs to serve the interests of a specific or several specific interest groups. A political party is not a vehicle to represent all Canadians. It never will be, it never has been, and it cannot possibly happen. Because not every Canadian's interests align or even remotely overlap. I'll just pick a really absurd extreme example, but the Quebec separatist and the Quebec federalist, their interests are completely diametrically opposed. If the issues about separatism or federalism, they completely disagree with each other, and there's nothing you can do to possibly make those two people agree to each other if that is the only issue on the table. So that's why you get political parties. The political parties rise up naturally because someone is able to offer something to a client group, and that client group benefits from it. What could that benefit be? Well, traditionally for the NDP, they pitch themselves to blue-collar manufacturing workers, mining workers, logging workers, and even historically they were pitching themselves to farmers. That's what the NDP was. That's what the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation was. They were rural, Western farmers, miners, blue-collar workers, that kind of deal. And their relationship to those kind of workers is, you vote for us and we get you safety regulations, we get you union protections and all this other stuff. But the modern NDP doesn't really do that. You're seeing a lot of this change. You look at I talk to people all sorts of different fields, but one particular guy I talk to all the time, he's a frequent commenter, Mad Beast Yeti. Good chap. And he'll often talk to me about the maritime industry. And one of the notable things about this is there's a very big split between young guys and old guys in the maritime industry. This is true everywhere, but it's very remarkably true in this one. And the young guys have no patience to someone like Singh. They don't see him as representing them or doing anything for them. And I know people who work as longshoremen in Nova Scotia, and I know people who work in actual literal factories Same deal. They don't feel like the NDP represents them anymore, especially federally. And it's because the NDP no longer really prioritizes their issues or their concerns. They do other things. So they've lost this client group. And what client group has the NDP under Singh chased? Well, they've chased the urbanite progressive. Now, notably, the urbanite progressive is really flip-floppy. They're not a good client group because they don't really have a core issue. As the urbanite progressive, their biggest thing is the most progressive current thing on the table. And as soon as it's ephemeral, or whatever that word is pronounced, but you know what I mean. It's not a tangible thing. The manufacturing worker has the same issues his entire life. The urbanite progressive's main issue changes over time because they're not a social strata that is defined by their work, that's defined by where they live, that's defined by their job. I said that twice. But they're more defined by their belief and that they live in a megacity. But beliefs are fluid, they change. So it's a very hard group to court. And the third thing a political party needs to do, on top of having a client group or more, one or more client groups, on top of being able to exercise political power, it has to provide a sense of purpose and unity to its members. They have to think that, yes, working with this party will get us the results we want. And that might seem like obvious, but it's really easily seen with the conservative movement in Canada why this can be very difficult. Because there's a lot of because the Conservative Party is such a big tent party, because of how right-wing politics works and first past the post, the Conservatives are a really big tent party, and it can be very difficult without a very strong leader to keep the right liberal types and the SoCons and the national conservatives all happy in the same tent because they have different issues. There's a lot of people who are conservative on everything, but they're almost single issue social voters who won't vote for the Conservative Party because they don't do anything on those issues. Or they might be single issue gun voters, and if you're not doing anything on the gun portfolio, they're not going to vote for you. Even though they're dispositionally conservative everywhere else, but they really, really care about this one issue, and they just won't vote otherwise. And that can be the really difficult thing. You have to a party has to herd these people in a common direction and give them some kind of win to keep them online. And the NDP is doing a terrible job at that. There's nothing. Singh hasn't given NDP voters really any tangible wins. People will sometimes say it's like, but what about dental care? Or what about pharmacare? And it's like, but the Liberals did that. The Liberals implemented those policies. Carney's defending those policies. So, if you're in an election, and a lot of these NDP core types who really care about something like dental care or pharmacare, if you're in an election where it is their belief that Poilievre will cut those things, regardless of whether that's true or not, I don't actually know, to be honest, but regardless of whether that's true or not, I'm not inside Poilievre's head. Regardless of whether that's true or not, they think that. So are they going to vote for someone who has no capacity to win and has a aimless campaign? Or are they going to vote for someone who says they're going to defend it? That's kind of the issue here, right? That's the problem 3 issue for the NDP. They can't really herd these voters because someone else can offer them the exact same thing right now. Now, does that mean the Carney coalition, if he does theoretically win a majority government, will that be stable? Probably not. It'll probably be an extremely unstable coalition. But if Carney has enough willpower, he can do it. One of the main issues in Canadian politics, which I won't belabor too much because we're getting near the end of the video here, but one of the main issues in Canadian politics is a lot of politicians lack will. People throw their hand up and say, this problem is too big. And it's like, no, it's not. People are like, oh, we can't reform the Senate. It's too big. And it's like, we totally could if you wanted to. I don't personally think there's a point to doing it because everything people suggest would just be as bad or worse. But like, we could do it. You can do anything with enough willpower. Now there's another equation there with political capital, but a lot of the problems we have in Canada are really just people throwing their hands up prematurely, saying, "Oh, we can't be done. We couldn't do it. It's too hard." People are like, "What about immigration? Oh, well, if we cut immigration, the economy will be bad." And it's like, well, we could do other things to counteract that. It's like, no. Just got to continue the same old status quo stuff that's broken. But anyways, I'll be back. I may or may not update this before the next month. I usually keep these about once a month because I don't, in case you're new here, I don't like just posting for the sake of posting. If I have nothing to say, I usually don't post for Canada Update. There's enough other things I could post about, but I'll just post that. Oh, sure, will Canada Update do more views than, like, I don't know, running a video about on Nova Scotia? Sure. But I'm not going to just post for the sake of posting. If you want someone who posts for the sake of posting, you can go to a different channel. I post when I have something I want to say. It is enough topics that's usually not a problem. But with that, I bid you guys adieu, and I will see you next week with something else.